Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Pep coming before us to essentially, as I hear you, emphasize for us the propriety of the parliamentary legislative tradition as the central thrust of government in our country and in our tradition, and secondly, the importance of the political process as an ongoing means of resolving the disputes in the nation, as distinct from either overburdening the courts with those matters or leaving it strictly and simply, as appears to be more often the case, more and more often the case, to first ministers gathering on terrain which isn't entirely described for anybody in any constitution or precedent in the nation. Can I ask you about where you see in all that our present status? Because I think our dilemma is that we have been brought into being as a committee, on the one hand, genuinely as a part of the legislature, and therefore part of a political process, but more immediately as sort of an appendage to the sovereign princes who you refer to, who have taken certain positions and then have said, well, yes, this needs legislative approval, but then the legislative approval really is only a rubber stamping. And in effect, when Mr. Barrass acts as quickly as he did, and it totally rigidifies the whole process for the legislature and makes it impossible to be what a legislature is supposed to be, and therefore this committee to be what it ought to be in this process. Do you see legislative committees like ours having a vital and ongoing role in this whole constitution-making business? And if so, how do we get around the kind of arbitrariness that we seem to be struck with on the other side of our activity?
Well, yes, and I certainly see you as having a vital role, and put it most simply, I think you should take your role seriously, and of course I'm suggesting you should simply give a resounding no to what's before you, but if you're not persuaded to go the whole way, as I suggest, certainly make amendments and push for them. And it simply would not be, well, I can't imagine that you would all have sat here for so long as you have already if you didn't have some idea that you could do that, however doubtful you may be as to just exactly where to go. So the simple answer is, of course, yes, you should take your responsibilities seriously and make your own decisions as to what is right, consider the objections that have been made, and propose amendments or reject the resolution as you see fit. Dealing with the question of process, how this was arrived at, I would suggest at a minimum a very simple, and I would have thought relatively innocuous change that could be made would be simply to strike out the provisions for First Ministers' conferences. I don't suggest that you forbid the First Ministers to meet, but to strike them out, because if you take the constitutional process, as long as that provision is in there for First Ministers' meetings, annual First Ministers' meetings, to discuss the Constitution, the concern that particularly Mr. Brio and others in this committee have expressed about how they got here and whether it'll happen again the next time is live and threatening. As long as in the Constitution itself the First Ministers are there to discuss the Constitution on an annual basis, committees of this legislature and so on are always going to be trailing on behind with very little hope of having any effective say on what is done. So the simplest thing that could be done to improve the process, to deal with that alone and not the substance of what has been decided, is to strike out the First Minister's meeting. And on that score, just strike out the constitutional ones. If they want to get together to have a general talk about the state of the nation, then I'm not in favor of it, but I think it's less threatening than the constitutional conferences.
Would you agree, I suspect you would, that if we are caught in a series of single problem-solving exercises around the Constitution, and this goes on and on, that we as a committee, on the other hand, are going to be drawn into a process that could well trivialize not just the process, but the Constitution itself, as everything and every issue becomes constitutionalized.
Yes, I think there's a serious risk of that, and I respect the various organizations, for instance, that have come before you. And I think even maybe if I were on the board of one of these organizations, I would perhaps have said to myself, well, I think we should probably go down to the select committee and say there should be something in Meech Lake for us. But that is one of the unhappy effects of all this Constitution making, that everybody immediately thinks that the first way to solve your problems, if you're unhappy with your position in society, is to get something in the Constitution. And once you've got it in the Constitution, then to go to the courts. And not just in respect of this resolution, but almost anything. You people might as well take a long vacation. And we really might as well forget about elections, because it's all going to be decided by the First Ministers, by the Constitution, and then by the courts. And I think that anything we can do to encourage people to return to normal politics, where if they have a concern, they think that they need more services, or they're being discriminated against, or whatever, if they come for legislatures or Parliament and they say, please pass a bill, and you consider that in the ordinary way, and if it doesn't work out, you amend it. That's the way to deal with all these issues. And as long as we persist in this constitutional obsession, we're never going to get back to that.
Thank you.